course, giving away money is popular. Receiving money is fun, but it's not the legislature's job. And you're right, Democrat or Republican, it's not their job to make short wins. It's to look to the future and make smart, logical decisions for the benefit of the public as a whole. And to send out a $400 happiness check one time was not too forward thinking.
That was the voice of Brandon Hewitt. He is from Michigan Auto Law. And today we're going to talk about reforming auto insurance reform in Michigan. I am Jer Stays. Welcome to your Daily Detroit for Thursday, November 2nd, 2023. Now, Michigan's auto insurance laws were reformed a few years ago, but what have been the impacts? Well, they're mixed, to be kind. We're going to have an in-depth conversation with Brandon about the impact, some of the changes that legislators are looking to make, and some of the things we might need to do to actually fix the high cost of auto insurance in the great state of Michigan. Before we get started, I want to tell you that episodes like these do not have sponsors or underwriters. They rely completely on listener support. So buymeacoffee.com/dailydetroit if you want to chip a few bucks in to support this kind of work. Joining me virtually to talk about some of these auto insurance changes and things you really need to pay attention to, Brandon Hewitt. He is an attorney and chief operating officer, Michigan Auto Law. Welcome to Daily Detroit. I've talked to some of your colleagues. It's the first time we've been able to be on air. Brandon?
Yeah, thank you so much for having us. We appreciate the opportunity.
Absolutely. So let's set the table for people really quick in case they haven't been following. There have been some adjustments to that 2019 law, and you and I were talking off air, and I've mentioned before, I was there when that thing got signed up at Mackinac Island. Some of the things that critics were worried were happened, and then some other things popped up too. Why don't we set the table from your perspective, Brandon, about these reforms and what was passed by the legislature, which, to be honest, I don't think that Governor Gretchen Whitmer is the biggest fan of.
Back in 2019, what people were warning about what was going to happen is that people would lose benefits and they wouldn't really see any meaningful change in their premiums. And lo and behold, 4 years later, here we are. People have lost significant medical benefits. Some people have lost their lives. And Michiganders are still paying some of the highest premiums for auto insurance in the entire country. Finally, the legislature, 4 years after the fact, after being warned about what was going to happen, they're finally coming back to the drawing board and trying to do something about what is happening here in this state, which has been really sad. You've seen a lot of medical facilities close, a lot of catastrophically injured, brain injured, spinal cord injured people lose their benefits, lose their care, be forced out of care facilities, have their care taken away from them. And now the bills that have just passed the Senate, they're waiting to pass the House here, are doing something. It's small, but they're doing something to try to get better reimbursement rates for some of these providers so that they can stay in business and provide that care that Michigan was so long known for taking care of their auto accident victims.
To be clear, there's a situation where we had a number of people who were covered under the previous system that ended up with the fee changes and everything losing their care because it wasn't enough for those companies to be able to exist and the providing to happen for these. And there have been a number of stories where basically this law cut off a bunch of people and it resulted in some pretty terrible instances. And I don't think that was comprehended at the time this was signed, or maybe it was known and we just leaders skipped over it or something, but it felt like the worst of both worlds where, I could understand something where you change something going forward, but it seemed to, until a recent lawsuit came through, it seemed to throw a lot of people who needed help under the bus.
Yeah, until this summer when the Supreme Court basically stepped in on a lawsuit that, took all that time to get to the Supreme Court. The legislature basically voided and rewrote insurance contracts for people. So, people who were injured in the 90s or the 2000s or even the 80s that, were catastrophically injured were receiving these unlimited lifetime medical benefits that were keeping them alive. And not only keeping them alive, but, helping them be productive members of society. Look, brain injury care and spinal cord care is expensive, right? Because it is caring for people who need it desperately, and it's very skilled, highly skilled work. And all of a sudden, in 2019, you have reimbursement rates cut by more than 50%, sometimes 70%. It's hard to tell any business operating in any industry that all of a sudden you're going to get 50% of the revenues that you were getting before, and you know what? You should just have to deal with that. So finally, the Supreme Court this summer stepped in and said, at least for those auto accidents that happened before the 2019 reform, things had to basically stay the same, how they were under those contracts, which was great for those people. That did provide some benefit. But the truth is, a lot of those places already went out of business, right? So a lot of that care is not coming back because those places were out of business already because of those changes. And it really didn't do anything, fortunately, because it's not within Supreme Court's power, obviously, to help anybody, post 2019 crash.
And please correct me if I am interpreting this wrong, but it's my understanding that when we got that, remember, if listeners might remember, you got that rebate or whatever with insurance. Some of that came out of the catastrophic claims fund, which is now running into some issues because we drained it. Like, it was very politically popular to put those checks out, and lots of people really seem to like them. But there seems to have been some other consequences to this, especially after that lawsuit was rendered.
Well, Jared, that was one of the most mind-boggling things about the whole reform, and then those checks, right? So before the form goes in, the catastrophic claims fund, as far as we know, because the books have never really been opened by the insurance industry, they never allowed any independent accounting of what their finances are. But by all accounts, as far as what we were told, the catastrophic claims fund had a major surplus before 2019. We're talking in the billions. And then, for political reasons or for goodwill reasons or whatever it was, everybody gets a check, a one-time check. I think it was what, $400?
Yeah, I believe it was 400.
$400 as a congratulations for saving the insurance industry all kinds of money. And then now we find ourselves with a claim, at least, that the catastrophic claims fund is running a deficit. So within 4 years, we go from billions in surplus to running a deficit. So that $400 check got turned into actually an increase in your premiums probably this year for your catastrophic claims fee. So where the benefit is there to the Michigan consumers and Michigan drivers, I don't know.
I mean, it was popular at the time. I know a lot of people were looking at it, but in reality, and this is my personal opinion, and this isn't about Democrat or Republican or anything else, practically, this was taking money away from people who needed care and then just distributing it. That tends to be the reaction or the action in reality.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, of course, giving away money is popular. Receiving money is fun, but it's not the legislature's job. And you're right, Democrat or Republican, it's not their job to make short wins. It's to look to the future and make smart, logical decisions for the benefit of the public as a whole. And to send out a $400 happiness check one time was not too forward thinking.
We'll talk about affordability in a minute. So let's get into the details, though, of this reform. You described it as somewhat minor, but having a big impact. What is this reform in its totality?
Well, at our firm and in our perspective, we're calling it a step in the right direction. It's not going to remedy everything, but it's a step in the right direction. Basically, you are seeing a 10% increase in whatever the reimbursements were from the 2019 Act. For a physician, hospital, or clinic, as of July 1st of 2024, currently they're paid at 190% of Medicare. That's going to go up to 200%. And so that kind of 10% increase across the board for most providers is what you're going to see. That is a small, change for the large cut that they saw in 2019. It's something. I don't think that these hospitals and providers are going to say no to it, but they went from like I said, a 50, 60, 70% cut. Now they're going to get 10% of that back. It's going to help, but it's not going to fix the situation.
And we're seeing auto insurance premiums rise. I mean, some people did see some relief, but from a number of listeners I talked to, it feels like there was this blip for the reform right near it, and then all of a sudden, back things crept up again.
Yeah, the people that saw any reasonable reduction in their rates were people that pretty much gave up their benefits, right? People that opted out of medical coverage. You saw a small change if you opted for a lower level than unlimited. But that's you're giving up something very significant for that rate reduction. And you're right. I think the average consumer saw something between $100 and $200 in rate savings. So what was promised on the front end for giving up these potential amazing benefits that we receive in Michigan never really saw fruition. In order to give that up, in order to get those rates, you had to give up even more. Basically, opt out and put all of the risk, all of the cost of care onto either your health insurance, if you're lucky enough to have it, or unfortunately, a lot of people, the risk went on to Medicaid and Medicare, and that is actually a shift of premiums and costs from the insurance companies to the Michigan taxpayer.
So this really wasn't a reform, it was a shift, is what I'm hearing you say as you describe it.
It was a major shift, major shift. The risk and the cost moved from private corporations to the public taxpayer.
I feel like I need to raise this point because, auto insurance is still very expensive in Michigan compared to other states. I've heard from listeners who have left the state and they are surprised at how little they pay. I have heard from listeners who, are crushed by auto insurance bills. I just saw one from one listener that, their payment is much higher than it used to be, almost $1,000 higher with no additional accidents. Like, this is something that is in Michigan, you have to pay. I am a transit advocate as much as anyone else, but the functional reality is to be a part of this society, you've got to have a car, access to a car. That's how it's set up. It's almost like it's not technically a tax, but it's something that feels like a tax because we all have to jump in on this. So how do we address affordability for real? Because here's the thing, Brandon. Other states have coverage. They haven't fallen into the sea. Why is it that we're where we're at? And what do we need to do to actually get competitive? You look at these costs and if you know that other states pay less, you don't understand why this is this way.
Well, I think we need leaders who are willing to stand up to the insurance industry and the insurance lobby. So we have an insurance commissioner that technically has the power to regulate the insurance industry here in Michigan, but the insurance commissioner is largely toothless. So there's really no significant power by the insurance commissioner to stop these insurers from charging excessive prices in Michigan, because excessive in Michigan, in the Michigan legislature, in the insurance code, is defined only if there is not a reasonable degree of competition that exists. Well, anytime you have two or three companies in an industry, there's going to be competition. And so it's easy for the insurance company to say, well, these can't be excessive prices because you've got 10 insurance companies here. Well, why do we think we have 10 insurance companies here? Because Michigan is a very profitable state to operate in. Of course, they want to come here and charge all these excessive premiums. So to say that there's competition is not terribly genuine when it comes to whether there's looking at whether there's excessive pricing going on. There is no controls on that. The insurance companies before 2019 were making billions of dollars in profit. After 2019, they're making billions of dollars in profit, and nothing is changing for the consumer. So what if the governor and the legislature are serious about actually bringing down premiums, they need to look at the actual cost factors. What are the actual cost factors? If anybody looks at what's called their declarations page, which shows what their coverages are and what their premiums are, what they're going to see is probably their largest premium goes towards repairing their vehicle, not medical, not unlimited medical benefits, not traumatic brain injury benefits, not liability coverage, none of that. It goes towards fixing the cost of your vehicle, and maybe that needs to be looked at. Maybe that needs to be looked at from making it so it's not a no-fault issue anymore. Cars are getting more technologically advanced. There's much more expensive components to cars now. So you're paying a lot of money to fix your car, right? So maybe that's what we need to look at instead of this illusion that is being put in front of us that all these costs are being driven by healthcare. And that's just hard to believe, because before 2019, they said that was the reason. So let's fix it all. Let's take away all this healthcare. Now, post 2019, premiums are the same. So that can't possibly still be the reason, right? So I think that We need some leaders that are willing to take a really hard look, examine the actual factors, maybe bring in some consultants from other states that don't have this ridiculous pricing going on and see what is going on in Michigan versus everywhere else.
I can't help but think that there's a lot of lobbyists involved with this because you have the insurance industry. In a way, you probably have the repair industry too because they're making money off of this thing. It's ripping people off all the way down, it feels like.
It does feel like there's a lot of special interest from all over, on all sides of things. That's going to be true of any, any industry and lobbying effort and legislative effort. But when you start to feel like it's getting controlled and written by the lobbyists instead of the people who are sent to Lansing to actually represent the consumer, that's where it gets a little troubling. And to us, Jared, the proof is in the pudding. We took the reform that the insurance industry largely crafted, who with promises that it would bring down premiums. It's been 4 years. They have not gone down. So let's take another look at it, right? It didn't come to fruition. So there's got to be a different fix.
I will say this again as somebody who is a big fan of making sure you're involved locally, that when you want to change your day-to-day life, being involved with your state rep, your local municipality, all those things, you're going to make a whole lot more difference in the world than focusing on the big national conversation. I think this is another opportunity here. If people want to be heard about this or want to learn more or put pressure, what can they do?
Exactly what you said. Find out who your local representative is. I mean, you're right. This is state-run stuff, right? And all of us have a state representative, a state senator, that should be accessible, right? Because you're not talking about federal elections here, you're talking about state elections. And you need to sit down and not just write them emails, which is great. Let them know what your concern is, call their office, let them know what your concern is. Find out when their office hours are, that they are meeting with the public, they're meeting with constituents. Find out when they're holding town halls and ask these very straightforward questions about what can be done, what is being done, and why is this happening to Michigan consumers. The more they hear from them, a lot of people think, well, what is one call going to do? What's my one email going to do? It's your email and then telling your friends to also email. And believe it or not, representatives do read their mail, they do listen to their messages, and they should be listening to their feedback that they're getting from their constituents. So, gather your community, gather your neighbors and your friends, and just start asking these questions.
I think it's important to be brave as well as in a nonpartisan way, because wherever you live, you might have a rep that maybe doesn't agree with you on other issues. But this is a situation where it's important to work together in a bipartisan way. And I mean, this step in the right direction, as you call it, passed in a strong bipartisan way. One of the reasons why Governor Gretchen Whitmer is concerned about it is that she might not have the ability to stop it with how bipartisan this step forward was. So if this is an area you can work with someone who maybe you don't always agree with, I think you can really improve your local community.
Yeah, I mean, the 2019 reform was bipartisan, right? So they're all on the hook for what happened or what's not happening, I suppose. And so, yeah, I think they're all in agreement now. At least a lot of them are in agreement now that something's got to change and things have to get done because they're just seeing the fallout from the decisions that they've made. And Governor Whitmer, whatever her motivations are for opposing this, was a big kind of a seminal moment for her in 2019 when she signed that bipartisan legislation. But I do think that it takes some bravery. You're right on the part of the citizens, but also on the part of our leaders to admit if they got something wrong, and to go back and make appropriate changes to remedy it. Look, nobody's perfect. I don't think we expect our representatives to be perfect, but we do expect everybody, ourselves and our leaders, to admit when they made a mistake and be willing to go back and make the appropriate changes.
Brandon Hewitt is an attorney and chief operating officer over at Michigan Auto Law. Thank you so much for your time. I appreciate it.
Well, we appreciate what you do, and we appreciate your listeners because obviously they're the people that are informed and paying attention to things. So, yeah, thank you so much for having us, and just keep doing what you're doing.